Created with free version for non-commercial use.
In this lesson, we will learn how to create full width backgrounds with fixed width interior content. It's difficult to explain this effect with words, so let's hop straight into a visual demonstration. In front of you is the example layout that we've seen throughout the course, and it features an overall container element with a white background that all of our other content sits within. Now I want you to contrast that with this layout. In this new example layout, we can see that the header section has a green background and it's not being confined by any other element. It's using up the full browser window width. And even if I make my browser window larger, we see that the content itself doesn't use more space, but the backgrounds of the sections fill the entire browser window width. So this is what I was describing earlier when I said full width backgrounds with fixed width interior content. This is a common layout technique that many of the world's most popular websites make use of. So in this lesson, we will be revisiting this old example layout that you are familiar with, and we'll be adjusting the code so that it looks more like this layout, which uses full width backgrounds. Let's get started. Our first step is to edit the HTML for our page. We can see that we have a div with a class of container that is housing all of the content on the page. And that's what's giving the page the white background that's horizontally centered within the browser window. So I'm simply going to delete that div. There's the end tag. There's the start tag. And we can adjust the indentation of this content just to stay organized. So now that we've removed that overall parent element, we can see that the background color of our root HTML element is shining through. So in our CSS, we've assigned a background color to our overall page. So now we need to assign background colors to each individual section. So if we want our main content area to have a white background, we can simply find that in the CSS, background color, solid white. And let's imagine that we want our header to use a darker background color with white text. We can make that adjustment very quickly. Header, background color. I'll paste in hexadecimal color code for a darker green. Let's change the color of the text to be white. We also need to adjust the color of the links in the header. Here's the rule that targets the links, so I'll change the color to white. And I can see a 5 or 10 pixel margin around all four edges of the page. So to remove that, we can simply target the body element of our page and be sure to remove any margin or padding. Excellent. So we now have full width background sections. The header uses dark green, the content area uses white, and if I make my browser window larger, you can see that they continue to use the full space of the web browser. However, this is very bad for readability because we can see that the content itself is also trying to use the full window width. And the human eye only wants to read so many words per line before it becomes fatigued. So we need a way to have fixed width interior content. Now you will remember earlier in the lesson we removed the overall parent container div. Well, now we can add container divs for each individual section. So for example, in the header in our HTML, we can cut all of the content that lives within the header. Remember, this header element is what's creating the dark green background. And within this element, we can create a div with a class of container. And then I'll paste back in all of the content. Now let's adjust the CSS for a class of container. The only properties that we will need are a maximum width. I will use 940 pixels. We want it to be horizontally centered, so we can say margin 0 auto. And if I save and refresh, we can see that the header element now has a fixed width for the interior content. So if we review our HTML structure, the header element is what's creating the green background color. And we have not assigned any sort of width to that element, so it uses the full window width. Then within the header element, we've wrapped an interior div with a class of container, and that directly houses all of our content. And the container element is what has a width and is margin auto to be horizontally centered. So now we can apply that same container class inside our main content area that has a white background. So in our HTML, we see here is the content area div. So I'm going to cut and paste all of its contents, create a new div with a class of container, and then paste back in the content. So content area has a direct child of container, and that will reuse this same rule. So if I refresh, our content area also has the same interior width. And now, no matter how large someone makes their browser window, our background areas will fill up the entire window, and our actual content will have a nice, clean, uniform margin. That's really all there is to this technique. It's a very simple concept, but it helps to see it put into action. Now, before we close out this lesson, I want to bring up a bit of a side note. The reason that I used max width instead of simply width on our container element is to make sure that smaller screens also work well with our layout. So for example, if I make my web browser smaller than 940 pixels wide, we can see that it does not force horizontal scroll bars, but instead the layout adapts. However, there's no spacing on the left and right sides of our layout. So to fix that, in our container element, we can simply say padding left, 40 pixels, padding right, 40 pixels. So now even if a screen or browser window is smaller than the max width we've set, there will still be a nice margin on the left and right. That's going to conclude this lesson. We are now one step closer to creating beautiful, flexible layouts. I will see you in the next lesson.
Created with free version for non-commercial use.